I did talk a little bit earlier today about Indigenous peoples representing 5% of the global population, thousands of distinct groups, where we occupy and use, depends on who you talk to, between 22 to 64% of the world's land surface to actualize our culture and our rights as Indigenous peoples. And that represents 80% of the world's global biodiversity and 85% of the world's protected and conservation areas. And this is where we start to get into the crux of like ransom economies. We heard from the previous speaker that the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples is a critical component, and it is. And one of the reasons why it becomes critically important when we talk about ransom economies is the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples is an internationally adopted instrument, and it was passed in 2007. Almost 2 decades of negotiations were held with Indigenous peoples. And what makes it so unique is that Indigenous peoples had a hand in developing it. That's never happened before. And to be totally fair, it's never happened since. So it's very, very unique. And it has these beautiful tenets that weave in the collective rights of our communities and our relationships with the natural world. And a lot of people ask, well, what's the difference between human rights and the Declaration of the Rights of Indigenous Peoples? Because why do they need special rights? So first off, it needs to be understood that the Universal Declaration of Human Rights was created in 1946, when Indigenous peoples in many parts of the world did not have personhood. And in Canada, we had no right to vote in 1946. Indigenous peoples had no constitutional rights to participate in civic and elections and processes and governance or managements of our lands and territories, despite the treaties that were signed, which I'll get into. And so that's one element of it. The second piece is that the Universal Declaration of Human Rights focuses on our individual rights, which we absolutely need individual rights and freedoms. This is not to negate or take away from that, but Indigenous communities work within a collective framework. So the UN Declaration of Indigenous Rights focuses on collective rights, the rights of the community to exist in their natural places in relationship with lands and territories.
Indigenous economy to, first of all, make those informal ideas, informal knowledge, we have to bring them to the mainstream. Very, very critical. And one thing that, one analogy that always comes to mind is when you think about technology, for instance, and you think about coding, algorithms are written for programs, and of course, we all use some of these programs. And somehow we benefited a whole lot from it, even while we are not able to understand the coding language like the specialists. But then we've enjoyed so much of the benefits of coding. The same thing with indigenous communities now. We just have to, first of all, bring those ideas, bring those knowledge to the mainstream in such a way that the community, the wider community, benefits from this wisdom. They benefits from these ideas, and these ideas has a connection with the development of the economy in the mainstream.
It's critical that Indigenous peoples have a vital role in not just moving forward what it means for us to develop climate policies and how our lands might be able to safeguard things. But we make up 15% of the world's poorest people, yet we sit atop of some of the richest resources that are being utilized and extracted to prop up capitalist frameworks and perpetuate the climate crisis while we remained locked into ransom economies that push our traditional economies further and further to the side. With that, I just wanted to say, like, within my own community, we are experiencing this huge influx of all these multinational corporations. And how are we dealing with that now? What are we doing in relation to these big projects coming in? When they first started in my region, we had no rights. These projects were approved, they were sort of blanketed, and the only way for us to get any kind of benefit from them was to participate. It was to get a job. But the racism was so staunch that we didn't even get jobs. They were like, we don't want to hire Indians. They literally were like, there's no way we're hiring these people. And the success story, which is almost sad in my nation, is that our business group, which is called ACTEN, started because one of the members of our nation started picking up trash around one of the sites because he was so tired of seeing all the waste. And then someone said, oh, well, I'll pay you to pick up trash. And then soon he was picking up more trash, and soon he was bringing more members to pick up more trash. So we have literally been cleaning up the messes of these industries. And that's how we got our foot in the door, by cleaning up their messes. And now my nation has a group of companies that are largely service providers to literally continue to clean up the messes of these industries. And that is our participation in these ransom economies. It's not because we support them, it's because we're doing what's best to try to protect and safeguard our lands, our territories, our cultures, and our identities from these things. And yet we are continually told that if you're working and getting jobs and making money from it, you have no right to say anything bad about it. But the reality is these projects are still an abrogation of our rights. They still obstruct our ability to access our lands, territories, waterways in a safe and healthy way. Everyone has the right to a healthy environment and safe drinking water. And these projects are an abrogation to it. This is just in my territory, but we've heard from the previous speaker that this is something that's happening across the board.
Those people who started the systems that now enframe and enclose, and in many ways define what our relationship is to land, to the planet, to each other, are now being confronted very directly, as Abiodun and Eriel have noted, by the realities that their economic system, their way of relating to the planet based on laws and processes that are entirely fictional, that have no lived reality other than through force and oppression, are encountering the fact that there are limits to that too.
Talked about the fact that there is hope within this. There is hope for us to find ways to structurally move together, but it requires that undoing of the structural inequities that have existed and moving away from the ransom economy and moving toward an equitable framework where Indigenous knowledge and Indigenous rights are held at the same level, and where our values and who's benefiting and who's not benefiting are actually taken into real consideration.